Welcome. This is WEBA's Conversations. I'm your host, Paul Friedman. I'm the Vice President of the West End Business Association, known as WEBA. I'm also a precinct captain for the Alexandria Democratic Committee and the founder and executive director of a gun violence prevention nonprofit, Safer Country. And I am thrilled to have an audience here for this wonderful opportunity to speak with a congressional candidate here in Virginia's 8th District, Victoria Virasingh. Before we begin, I just want to mention that a week from now, at the same time, we will be conversing with our incumbent, Representative Don Beyer, and we will hope to ask them both interesting and challenging questions that will help the audience and all the voters potentially in our 8th District choose whom they would like to see as the Democratic nominee to run for Congress in November. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Victoria Virasingh. Victoria, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Paul. Wonderful to see you this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's great to have you. And, I want to begin with really the very beginning. A lot of people don't know you still. And so it's important for them to find out a bit about you. So please tell us, I know you grew up in the area, but give us a little detail about that and how you decided to run for Congress.
Definitely. My name is Victoria Virasingh. I was born in Arlington, actually in Arlington Hospital. It's now Virginia Hospital Center. Both of my parents are immigrants. My mom is from Ecuador in South America. My father was born to Punjabi Sikh refugees in Bangkok, Thailand. My story is the story of millions of immigrants, first-generation Americans and working-class Americans throughout the U.S. Neither of my parents are college educated. They worked minimum wage jobs. At times, we were just surviving on my mom's minimum wage job as a manicurist. And the values that my parents and my community instilled in me was that in this country, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you work hard, you can do anything that you want. So with that, I hit the books. I was lucky to have excellent mentors, teachers, to have opportunities available to me to enrich my academic experience, not just in the classroom, but outside by being a Girl Scout, getting involved in soccer and basketball and learning piano. I got a full ride to Stanford University, where I got my bachelor's degree in international relations and my master's degree in Latin American studies. And as I started my career, I spent many summers working for Senator Feinstein in her DC office before transitioning into the technology industry. I worked for a company called Palantir Technologies. And after Palantir, I did a lot of volunteer work. I started engaging in my community here in Northern Virginia. I became a board-appointed commissioner for the Arlington Economic Development Commission. I became a precinct captain as well, Paul. Was the vice chair of outreach for the Arlington Democrats. I did a lot of work with communities and schools at Barcroft Elementary School. And all throughout this journey, I've been talking to families, to people like those who are listening, like your families. Every single person that I've talked to, every family has their dream, their American dream. And the reason why I'm running for Congress is because this American dream, the structures that have upheld and created opportunity for everyone, are slowly dismantling or have stagnated. And I believe that when we bring diverse voices, a lived experience to meet the moment of today, we create policies that help uplift our communities, that create welcoming and thriving and safe neighborhoods. And we build a bridge to the future that lifts all tides, all boats, lifts all tides.
All right. Well, I know you've answered this question before in smaller gatherings, but I'd like you to address it here on our show. The incumbent congressman not only represents our district, but he's tasked with raising money for candidates around the country. This cycle, Democrats are facing a real challenge in being able to hold on to the majority in the House. His time is obviously essential in that work to raise money. So I'd like to know, was that a factor? Did you consider the time that he would have to devote to this campaign when you considered it might pull away from the I think the worthwhile activities he's doing on the part of the larger party?
That's a great question, Paul. And I'd like to take a look back to the governor's election, which was a really tough election. We had a lot of money. I mean, Governor McAuliffe is an excellent fundraiser, but the money didn't do it at the end of the day. It was a combination of factors that led to the election of Governor Youngkin. But one of the ways that this campaign is helping to make sure that we're securing our majority, not only in Virginia, but throughout the nation, is by expanding the electorate. We saw communities of color who have voted for President Biden vote for President Youngkin in the election. Money can't buy votes. Money can help communicate and is very important. But I believe it's the combination of resources and candidates that can expand the electorate, candidates that can reach out to communities to help ensure that we're bringing every community out to vote. So I actually believe that my entrance into this primary, win or lose, is creating opportunities to expand the electorate, to bring more people in. And by the way, if they're coming into the Democratic Party because of Victoria Virasingh, they're likely here to stay. And that is a lasting legacy that we will create throughout this campaign.
Now, this district is considered solid blue. The odds of you winning, if you were the nominee, are very high, which is the reason that the incumbent, Don Beyer, is being tasked with helping candidates around the country. If you were elected and you had the opportunity to be asked to do that, would you be traveling around the country? Would you want to be helping other candidates?
Absolutely. And, I'd like to make another point. Traditionally, we are very blessed to have so many Democratic donors supporting the party. But let's look at a new generation. I was part of a technology world where there are a lot of individuals who would love to support the Democratic Party that have never been invited to. So I believe that, my entrance and my ability to bring in new donors, new technology donors, new younger donors that have disposable income that they would like to contribute to supporting candidates like me. The future of the Democratic Party is essential. It's that combination of the two that makes our party so important. And absolutely, I believe that we are creating a Democratic playbook that will be successful not only here in Virginia's 8th district, but can be extended to many districts across the US. That demographic talks about messaging. I talk to a lot of people. A lot of people are very frustrated with the Democratic messaging. We have built a very concise messaging it's multilingual, that's reaching voters across socioeconomic classes in many different types of ways. That playbook can be extended to across the US. So if elected, I would dedicate my resources to representing the needs of this district while also helping to other districts and other candidates expand the electorate and use the playbook that we are creating to create wins in other districts as well.
Okay. Now let's move to a more philosophical question. Voltaire, his quote is very popular in DC, and that quote is, "The perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good." And that quote is often used to encourage progressives to come on board and compromise to pass bills that maybe aren't the ones they actually put forward and want. But I think the infrastructure bill is an example, and the debate we had over whether we should wait and have the Build Better Back bill put together with that or not and separated. So I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you agree with that quote. And had you been in Congress, would you have agreed to the compromise in which they put forward the infrastructure bill and moved on it? Or would you have said, no, we want to wait until we get both bills before we do either one?
It's a great question. And I'd like to larken back to my time in the Senate. I worked at a time where, yes, there was heated political debate. And yes, there was extreme, differences. But I saw lawmakers come together. I saw compromise. I saw lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, after heated discussions, go out to dinner with their families at the end of the day. We've lost a lot of that in Congress, unfortunately. I am running as a progressive. The policies that we are putting forth, I believe, are policies that create a bridge towards the future, that level out the playing field. But you're right, Paul. You've got to compromise. There's got to be ability to work together. We've had the opportunity here to engage with all political ideology on the left, on the right, in the middle. We've presented ourselves in ways that appeal to a wide group of people. Yes, I have some lofty goals. I've got some high-reaching policy goals that are going to take time to get there. But there's always a place to start. And I believe it's incumbent upon our Congress elected officials to build the foundations that are going to lead to those monumental changes. And that's exactly what we are seeking to do with every single one of our policies. And yes, the compromise is necessary for this.
So, if I may just follow up, had you been in Congress, would you have been satisfied with moving forward on the infrastructure bill and work for a better day to get further legislation to help America, or would you have said, "No, I'm not going to go along"?
So it depends on which point. I would have followed Pramila Jayapal's leadership when she came, to the table. Obviously, I was disappointed to see many of the provisions, such as a lot of climate provisions, as well as the child tax credit. That was definitely a disappointment, but it's not the end. There are other strategic ways for us to put those forward. And if you look at what happened, it wasn't the progressives holding up that bill. It was, to more on the moderate side. So, look, that's a proven example of progressives coming to the table and being a team player. And I would have stood alongside, Pramila and been a team player to get that passed, while also looking forward to more opportunities to include and bring those provisions that were taken out onto the decision-making table.
In looking at possible questions today, I looked at the headlines alone in our news, and we are overwhelmed with issues. We have COVID, we have Ukraine, we have the Supreme Court, we have guns. It's a lot to talk about here, and I want to try to get to all of them. But let's start with the Supreme Court. Now, we've just watched over the last few years as the former president appointed 3 people who were selected for him from a list of people who were determined to overrule Roe v. Wade. They nonetheless went up on the Hill and testified, and according to some, they misled or lied about their position on that very issue to senators. Do you feel that that is the case? And if you do, would you call for the impeachment of any of those Supreme Court justices? And if not, would you fight for adding members to the Supreme Court so that we can overcome the situation we have now, where basically it's a 5-4, sometimes a 6-3 vote against liberal issues that come before the court?
So, Paul, when I was watching those hearings, I had a huge suspicion that they were, in fact, misleading the American public, misleading our elected officials on their actual position. I knew from the moment those appointments were made that Roe v. Wade was going to be on the line, as we have seen today. My position, has been to codify Roe. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and to expand the court. I believe that, look, we had a system that worked back in the day. It's 2022. It's a different era, and we have to meet the moment that we're in today. This is about, I'm a big proponent of term limits. I believe that, these lifetime appointments, while they worked in the past, may not fit, and actually does not fit the current structure that we have today. So I believe in expanding the court. I believe that I believe all elected and appointed members of our judicial and legislative communities should have term limits, and I think that would really help with a lot of the problems that we're seeing today, and just create better incentives. Where we need to create a system of government where we are incentivizing good policy decision making, not decisions for your political career, not because there's going to be no pushback because you're in there for life, but really a system that's going to encourage and discourage bad behavior.
Let's look at the issue of trying to legislate Roe on a federal level. And we just saw a vote in the Senate. It failed. We not only lost in terms of all the United Republicans voting against it, but we faced the problem of even reaching 50 with the Democrats. But there are 3 people there: Joe Manchin and Susan Collins and Senator from Maine, Lisa Murkowski, and they all put forward an alternative, which they claimed to be consistent with Roe, but has so far not been accepted by the Democratic leadership. I know our Senator, Tim Kaine, has been speaking with Senator Collins on trying to find a compromise bill. How do you feel about the idea of compromising anything that might come out of Senator Kaine's efforts? Or are you in a position to say, I'd rather leave it be and take it to the public in November and see what comes of the outcome then?
I'm very grateful for the work of Senator Kaine and working to try and find a compromise. Look, I'm as it stands right now, no, that's not sufficient, and we shouldn't settle for anything less than what the American people and American women deserve in this country. Let's see what comes out of it. I'm, open. Let's see the details. But look, I mean, this is going to be an issue for our generation. I mean, this is going to be an issue. And so I believe that the voters are going to have an opportunity to make their voices heard in November. I believe that while the fallout is going to impact working class moms, women of color disproportionately, we have got to fight back, and we have to ensure that the next piece of legislation is even better than what was before. And the way that we do that is we've got to have the majority. We've got to win. We have to get those seats in order to enact these laws. So I get it. I've been on the steps of the Supreme Court. I was invited to speak. I was there every single day when I first read the SCOTUS briefing. I've been talking to women across Virginia about this very issue, and we're frustrated. Like, I'm frustrated. I'm tired, but I know that we can do this, and I know that we can create something even better with more opportunities for people. And so my North Star is always moving forward. So let's see what happens. But if not, let's keep pushing forward. And I know that we will get there. And I know that that our future will be one in which our daughters and granddaughters have the same, if not more, access to reproductive health services than we do today.
All right, so let's move to democracy. Many people view this election as one which may indicate whether or not we will remain a democracy as a country in the future. And but before we get to the domestic side of that, let's look at the international side, since you have an international background and an international training. Right now, we're in a war with Vladimir Putin's Russia. We're helping Ukraine. We're spending a great deal of money to do that, and the Democrats are 100% behind that as far as we can tell. And there was some uncertainty among those on the other side of the aisle. There are some people on the other side of the aisle who don't think we're doing the right thing, don't really fully support NATO. And in fact, we'll get to this more in depth later, but Tucker Carlson on Fox is apparently a featured guest on his videos are featured in Russia because they're so supportive of Putin. So let's start with this. Are you 100% supporting the money we're spending in Ukraine, and do you 100% support NATO?
I do. I 100% support the money I support the Ukrainian people. As the granddaughter of refugees, my grandparents, my dadima, that's how we call our grandparents in Punjabi. The partition of the Punjab state led to so many civilian killings. It led to displacement. My grandparents found refuge in Bangkok, Thailand, where they were able to raise their children and create a new life for themselves before my dad came to America. What's happening in Ukraine is deeply personal. There are situations that occur that civilians have nothing. There's no control over. As stewards of democracy, as world leaders, it is incumbent that we support Ukrainian people. I believe that what's happening is setting a precedent. If Russia is able to fully fulfill his plan, it will set a precedent. And this is not something that's new. If you talk to many, which we have many experts in the field, this was foreseen. This was something that we were anticipating. So Yes, we must stand with the Ukrainian people. Yes, we must continue to be stewards of democracy, both here in the U.S. and abroad. I believe in rebuilding a 21st century refugee program that includes better access for training and placement programs, that has an accountability arm that can help reinforce this, that includes a better system to make sure that our arrivals are giving opportunities to contribute to American society, to use the skills that they have and be able to be effectively placed into our community here, especially in Northern Virginia, where we have received quite a number of refugees, not only from Ukraine, but from a lot of the conflicts happening globally.
There is probably no greater vote, no more difficult vote than a vote with regard to war for a member of Congress. And Rule 5 in NATO says that we must come to the aid of any country, no matter how small, no matter, and of course, in the NATO community right now there are 30, I believe, and we may have 32 soon if Finland and Sweden are added to NATO. If Russia were to launch an attack and cross the line into NATO, would you be prepared to support the president, as he said, even if it's an inch into NATO, we will respond? Are you prepared to support him on that?
We must stand with our allies, as a leading member of NATO, as someone as a country who's contributed a lot of financial aid and a lot of financial assistance. We must be united. I believe that this decision has to be allies in conjunction with what they're seeing on the ground as they're closer to the ground. So my stance is we stand with our allies. There has to be consistent communication. This needs to be unison. This has to be an agreed upon statement, an agreed upon objective between all of us together. And I believe that we have the allies, we have relationships that have been built over the past many decades for this moment, and we'll be prepared to stand alongside our allies and to work with our ally communication on the ground for a decision based on changing needs of the escalating situation in Ukraine.
Well, you're breaking up a little bit, and I'm a little concerned, but maybe our team behind the scenes can help to fix that. Right now, you appear to be frozen. So we'll pause for just a moment, see if we get you back. Are you there, Victoria?
I am there. Can you hear me?
It's sort of broken up at the moment.
I've got full internet here.
We want people to be able to hear you.
Yes, I've got full internet here. So
okay, there you go. I think you're.
Oh, good.
Think you're back.
Okay.
Let's go to democracy at home. We have seen an insurrection directed at our nation's capital. That insurrection was apparently part of a plan to really take over our government illegally and pretend that it was legal by moving the vote from the people into the House of Representatives, where states would be represented by their delegations, and Republicans controlled the number of more states than Democrats. And the former president hoped to and expected to win a vote in the House and take over the country illegally. He is continuing to work to spread a big lie around the country about the fact that he believes he won that election, and working to get people put into office around the country in the offices of Secretary of State and other key offices in order to perhaps pull this off, pull some other kind of coup off again in the future. How concerned are you about that? And do you have any thoughts about what our Justice Department should be doing at this point, and if it's doing enough?
Absolutely. So here are two thoughts that I have on that. The first is supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It is essential that we safeguard the right to vote, that we expand opportunities to everyone who is eligible to vote here in this country. That is one of the ways that we can combat the misinformation, what's happening. Second one is, let's talk about misinformation. Let's talk about the ways in which our voting electorate is receiving news and receiving information. As I see in which these algorithms are created. And that's why it's so important that we have legislators that understand technology, understand the ways that these algorithms are created, especially when it comes to our democracy, something so vital. We've seen it with public health and the coronavirus as well. So what can we do to prepare, build domestic resiliency, work on combating misinformation through federal legislation, and supporting and expanding the right to vote, and making sure that we're creating accessible opportunities and supporting legislation which does it at the federal level.
Oh, well, let's go in that direction a bit, because there's much to talk about in that direction. And let's bring in the Buffalo tragedy, the mass shooting. It's really horrific what happened there, but it's not the first mass shooting that involved an attack on minorities. We've seen a great many attacks in our country by solo shooters, but they're not lone gunmen. We know that this is part of a wider network. They've attacked Black people, they've attacked Asian people, Jewish people. There's a consistency to this, and it does come from both the internet manipulating certain people and from Fox TV, specifically Tucker Carlson, who is calling, I believe he's 400 times now, they cited that he has mentioned replacement theory as a way to energize people to do this kind of horrific act. This is difficult. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech. But if you're a member of Congress, what can you do, or what do you think you might want to do, especially with your expertise in technology, to try to address what we're facing here with the manipulation of people, both whether it comes to believing misinformation or disinformation, or being encouraged to take this kind of violent action?
Well, I want to say, when I heard about the shooting, it impacted me, my family, our it's I want to give the family recognition and sending all my best to them. Look, this horrific racist domestic terror attack targeting a predominantly Black community in Buffalo, New York this past weekend is a pattern that we're seeing. As a candidate of color, I have experienced harassment. I have experienced a lot of threatening behavior. And yes, part of that is part of just being a candidate, but, is part of it also tied to the fact that I'm a minority? I think so. And I worry for my family, for my community. There was the shooting in the hair salon at Koreatown. My family works in the hair nail salon business. That could have been my mom. It could have been my cousin. It could have been my aunt. So what are the steps that we need to combat this, especially as you mentioned misinformation? So one, I think we got to talk about, Paul, we got to talk about guns. We got to talk about enforcing laws. And I feel like we have to include more background checks to prevent people with history from owning guns. We prohibit the sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. But really, when it comes to misinformation, this is where we need federal legislation. Our information is being traded and sold on the internet. The way the algorithms are fed hate rhetoric because they want to encourage more participation on these platforms. Let's create some guardrails around this because there is we don't have sufficient guidelines at the federal level. Individual companies are taking upon themselves to self-regulate, but I don't think it's working. Clearly, it's not working. So we need to promote, better policies. We need to support legislators and support candidates that can bring that. But look, let's talk about representation. Let's talk about bringing more communities of color. Let's talk about bringing more candidates and representatives of color to represent these communities and make sure that people are visible and listening to the communities and creating legislation on the preventative side instead of dealing with it on the aftermath. The last thing I'll say about this is around mental health. I'm a huge supporter of creating more accessible and affordable mental health resources, especially for our students, staff, and teachers. It's very costly. It's very inaccessible as it stands right now, and making sure that we're supporting a wide variety of initiatives to help our community is essential, especially as these attacks continue to rise.
Well, let's move to the guns a bit more in depth. It's obviously frustrating to Democrats who we cannot pass legislation through a Senate that's blocking federal legislation on a whole range of whether it's comprehensive background checks, safer storage laws, et cetera. For some reason, Republicans don't believe in safer storage, and they don't believe in making sure that we don't have the loopholes closed to the very background check system, which we all rely upon. It sort of confounds the idea. They also don't believe in preventing ghost guns from being used by criminals. Democrats are trying to make sure that every gun has a serial number. And apparently the Republicans have a different point of view. They'd rather have people not be able to have their guns tracked if they've been used in a crime. Finally, we've had this situation in Buffalo where a red flag law might have been used. It exists in New York. And yet as it stands right now, we don't believe it was used, and we're not sure why. But it could be because of a lack of knowledge about the law. So while we may not be able to pass a new law on the federal level, you perhaps in your role could be speaking out and raising awareness about the law where it exists in the 19 states that have it, including Virginia's. So grapple with some of those issues, and while you're doing it, tell us if you have a sort of an anti-crime agenda that is part of that.
Absolutely. So, Paul, you bring up a really good point. There's so many ways that we can just start to solve this. Unfortunately, the gridlock in Congress is really preventing us from enacting even these basic laws. I mean, red flag laws to me feel like a really attainable, achievable thing that does not infringe, on the Second Amendment right, but just creates an opportunity for us to safeguard our communities and our children. And that should be the North Star. And I actually do believe that with more conversations, we can get there. But when we think about this changing world that we're living in, I believe there's a role here for technology. Again, creating a system where we can understand and track all this information. We're an expansive country. We have many jurisdictions, but this makes it even more difficult for us to ensure that we're tracking bad actors, that we're preventing bad actors from getting firearms that they're going to use for these shootings. Technology can play a huge role in creating a more centralized system where everybody can understand I think is essential. And, a solution can be made at the federal level with funding and working within the states to make sure that we have a sharing of data. And this could even help, not just with a lot of the shootings, but can help get a greater picture. What I find, and my opinion is that we're very reactive. There's more research being done on violence. There are efforts to really increase work on the preventive side. But if we had a better system of tracking, if we could see the data around this in a real live form way, I believe it would help us better target and understand where the root causes are happening and prevent them from any serious mass tragedies that would occur.
Okay, we're still having occasional problems with your feed. If you do have any other programs or websites up on the screen behind you, maybe you can close them. That might reduce the problem. We want to make sure everybody hears what you have to say. It's really important. Did you hear me there?
I did. Yeah. It's funny because I've got full bars. I've nothing else is running. It's just you and me on this. So
all right. Well, we'll hope for the best here. Okay, so let's take one more comment about the democracy issue. If elected, you're going to have to serve with people who participated in attacking our country's national capital. And how does that make you feel?
It definitely makes me feel concerned. It makes me feel a little disillusioned with democracy and disillusioned with our political system. I will say, having worked in the Senate, having engaged with many elected officials, I understand, and I understand that there's oftentimes the appearance, and there's your public statement, and then there's what you actually believe. And unfortunately, we have a political system which promotes saying things and doing things for the electorate in order for a brand because it's part of a party line. That's why I think it's really important for us to put forth independent thinkers, people who are going to go in and legislate and speak truth to power. It's one of the reasons why, I am running in a Democratic primary. I believe that we need people who are not going to fall in line with party ideology. And I think that goes on both sides. I am proud to be a Democrat. That doesn't mean that I disagree with some of the Democratic platform, the Democratic messaging, especially when it comes to foreign policy in Ethiopia and in Central America. And speaking out about these things, I believe, is essential to our democracy.
Before we get to Central America, which I'm curious about now that you have articulated saying you have a different point of view on that, let's just close up on what's happened on a domestic democracy area. There are many people who believe that we should be passing a law to restrict the power of the president for fear that a future president could use our own military against us. And we have seen over maybe the last perhaps since the Vietnam War, a movement towards greater power in the presidency and less in Congress. And certainly Congress never likes to declare war. They'd rather let the president take charge of these things and all the heat. As a member of Congress, would you begin to push for legislation that would restrict the powers of the president and give more power back to Congress? And do you think that would be the right course to go?
So, do we need reform within our electoral college process? Do we need reform within the powers that be? Yes, we do. What that looks like exactly is still part of an ongoing conversation that we need to have. But yes, I do believe that there needs to be reform. What the details of that look like, we're still in conversation. We're still having these conversations to get there. But let's open up that conversation. Let's challenge the existing notion that we currently have. That's what this campaign is all about. So yes, Paul, absolutely, and really looking forward and really dedicated to having more conversations around this, so we can actually build a government system that works, and more importantly, especially in the topic of democracy, that rebuilds trust between our voting electorate and the American people and the government. Trust that has largely been lost over the past few years.
Do you think it's essential, though, that we pass something before the next president takes charge in 2024? I mean, if a Republican were to take charge, they would have enormous power. There's enormous emergency powers that we've discovered the president has that many of us don't even know the full extent of. Does that concern you?
Absolutely, it does concern me, but we've got to do it in the right way. We can't jump the gun, because those consequences, we could have unforeseen consequences. So let's do it the right way. Let's sit down, let's talk about the options, a concise and concrete plan of what's actually going to work, and not going to work just for right now, but think in many different, for the next 10 to 20 years, what can sustain this democracy, regardless of party, right? This is not about party. And maybe, Paul, this should be really brought in with nonpartisan experts. Let's bring the parties out of it, and let's bring, an independent, a third party to help us face these issues. One, that would help with getting more support on this, but two, just ensure that it's not being done to support one party over the other, but really done to support democracy and ensuring that we're protecting the interests of the American people.
Right. Well, this is more a question of Congress versus the president, less partisan politics. We have a tripartite system. We have a Supreme Court, a Congress, and a presidency. And if they're out of balance, it could be a problem for our future democracy. So that's really where I was going with that. But let's move to immigration and Central America. I think this is a fascinating area for you to discuss. And I'd love to give your thoughts about what you think the Democratic Party should be doing with regard to Central America that it's not doing, and how that influences what our supposed comprehensive immigration reform project or plan would be if we ever get to try to pass one.
Right. So, first of all, when we talk about immigration reform, we have to create a just and humane process at the border. These are real people. These are real people who are fleeing a multitude of complex situations. And we have the capacity, we have the resources to put forth a just and humane immigration process, what includes I believe, that means we need to modernize our immigration system. There is a backlog right now. We need to create very clear systems for, TPS, asylum, those who are seeking to come on tourist visas. As someone who has my master's in Latin American studies, I've understood that we have a history. America has a history of intervening in Central and South America that I believe and research has led to political instability and economic instability in these countries that has led to a lot of the immigration that we see today. How can we work with our allies south of the border? Let's work with them. We give aid to a number of different countries. Let's make sure their aid is being driven to help support economic and political stability in our neighboring countries. NAFTA was an example of a great partnership between our neighboring countries. What are other opportunities for us to create continued allyship and partnership on these issues? Immigration reform is a hot topic, and there is similar, to the gun conversation, very difficult, between both sides. But we can do this. We can promote a good system that works, that's clear and concise. And let's make sure that we're moving towards that North Star and let's think about a number of ways that we can support our neighboring countries. And I believe take a little bit of responsibility for a lot of our presence that has contributed to what we're seeing today.
I think it's safe to say the Republican Party supports closing our borders to everyone who isn't white or maybe from Cuba. And Democrats are being called an open border, having an open border policy. But of course, Democrats deny that. Yet it's exactly what Democratic policy should be in terms of how we allow people in and how we welcome people in is a little fuzzy because it's complicated, hard to explain to the public and hard to analyze. Do you have in terms of messaging, and you've spoken about the need for messaging, would you have a way of messaging this issue on a national basis for the Democratic Party to find their footing?
Yes, absolutely. Look, everybody can agree, left, right, center, we have very complicated and messy immigration process as it stands right now. It's complicated. It's expensive, it's very timely, it's costly, it's not working. So how can we reform this process to have a process that works to safeguard, Americans and make sure that we're also creating opportunities? We have a labor shortage in this country. A lot of that labor comes from our immigrant community. I've spoken to, as a member of the immigrant community, I've spoken to a number of immigrants who want to participate in the labor workforce, who are here because they want to contribute to the American economy, who have been here contributing to the American economy for decades, yet they live in the shadows because they don't have access to healthcare yet, or citizenship papers, yet they pay into Social Security that they will never see before. So it's not working. And I think that we have to talk about moving forward and finding opportunities where we can start building the foundations of what will lead to, I think, comprehensive reform. And it's simple, let's make it easy to understand. Let's make it more cost accessible. Let's create, systems that actually could modernize the systems so we can do a lot of this online in multiple languages. We're working with our embassies in countries where we do see a lot of immigration patterns to have very clear understanding of this. This is very approachable. This is something that we can do. I've watched my parents go through the immigration process back in the 80s and 90s. It was much clearer and understandable where you fit in and where you didn't fit in. And that is something that we can start to do and educate our communities on these processes today.
When it comes to the turmoil in Central America, how much of that do you ascribe to the gang cartels, the drug cartels, and what should we be doing with regard to the drug war in America that might lessen that situation?
Let's legalize. Let's move to legalization of marijuana. I think we should take, a look at a number of other drugs and understand, where we can find opportunities to lessen the influence and control of the narcotics. I mean, look, one of the major problems that I found that I've stood against is why constantly fighting against the legalization. It is created an open door for the drug cartels to actively engage in the market and to come without any sort of, was very difficult for us to we control it. We take the control of the hands back to the US. We tax it, those are taxable funds. We can regulate it, we can make sure that the standards are good, we can put guardrails around it. I mean, this is the future. Research supports this. There's a number of experts in the field who also support this, and I stand fully behind the legalization of marijuana. And let's take a look at ways to take control of these bad actors and into control of Americans.
Okay, that's a complicated area to take on, but I think I applaud you for being bold in your approach. We have obviously in the time remaining, I think it's good for us to tackle a domestic crisis, and that is the economy. We know we are dealing with the remnants of COVID, hopefully the remnants of COVID. We're dealing with Ukraine, and all of that has led to supply chain problems and to unusual demand. We have higher costs than ever, higher inflation that's gone up. Democrats are facing a difficult time dealing with that in this election cycle. Do you think that the president is doing all he can? Do you think there's more that he should be doing to make a difference on inflation? And do you think that the price of our gasoline, for instance, which is so high, is really the cost of, we may go back a step, of freedom, since we're trying, it really is a large part of what's happening in Ukraine. So what are your thoughts on this?
So I think we need to build domestic resiliency. It's, yes, our economy is interconnected, supply chain problems because, through a number of decisions in the past few decades has led to the increased activity of our economies. We are seeing that impact right now, but let's focus on building domestic resiliency so that we're not completely reliant on our international relationships to support us, especially when there are situations like conflict in Ukraine, Russia, in China. That's the only way to move forward. I think when it comes to making sure to sustain the American economy, there's ways to do that. I'd love to see us back, manufacturing the job places where we can rely on our supply to meet the demand that we're seeing in the U.S. We just had a tour of the Northern Virginia area and looking at a lot of the economic growth and a lot of big companies. There's a huge opportunity for us to invest in data centers here during different parts of the U.S. Let's do it. Let's help offset demand. Let's use this moment as an understanding of the impact that we're seeing today. American people are hurting, especially with the rise in prices, to build that in domestically so that we're prepared in the future for whatever it is to come.
We're faced with a conundrum at the moment. We want more oil to be put on the market to lower the price of gas. But at the same time, we know the danger of climate change. And the more oil that's used, and the more fossil fuels that are used, the quicker our world is endangered. And this is a conundrum. And of course, we would love to have reliable, renewable sources of energy to replace fossil fuels, but we're not quite where we need to be to make that entirely feasible, to replace it entirely at this point. So in this pull and push of climate change and immediate oil crisis, which should we prioritize?
Well, I think there's a way to get both of this, and it's through urban planning. It's through incentivizing and investing in urban planning structures that support transportation and mobility, while also making sure that we're in line with our climate change goals, which is a huge part of our platform, and making sure that we are building a planet that is going to exist for the next generation. So let's talk about, increasing bike lanes. Let's talk about building more public transportation, high speed rails to get people from here to Richmond, up to Baltimore and various parts of the DMV area, so that we're less reliant on prices, less reliant on gas, but that mobility is still accessible. I mean, that is maybe history of this country, of legislation supporting cars, of legislating supporting the gasoline industry. let's move away to that. And I think that in our district, especially, given that some parts of our district are extremely dense, given our connectivity to DC, Baltimore, and Richmond, this is a place where we could be a leader. We could be a leader on housing that supports a greener future. And I believe that I'm the best candidate to propose those legislations and build that bridge to the future while also building a greener climate at the same time.
You know, obviously the biggest problem we have is the political problem of convincing the Republican Party and its voters that we have a crisis, that climate change exists and it's man-made. And yet we have had the CEOs of the major fossil fuel companies come before Congress and testify that they agree. Mankind is responsible for this. But I don't think many people know that actually took place. They don't really know that these very people who are still part of the problem recognize that they are the problem. At least they are managing the top end of the problem. And what more do you think you could do in your bully pulpit position as a member of Congress to get the word out to the public at large that get on board? Everybody, even the fossil fuel companies, admit what we're facing.
Absolutely. You know, I actually was collecting signatures when we were getting on the ballot, and I asked a man, and I had a man like, literally try to convince me that climate change was a hoax and wasn't real. And he like followed me to my car and was very aggressive in that respect. So that it's here, I hear it from voters here in the district. This is, again, where misinformation and the ability to discern fact from opinion is crucial in disseminating information. Obviously, so research of it, but again, if you're a voter, someone who is misjudging, who's very critical of a media platform that doesn't agree with your political views, then you're less likely to trust information that's coming out of there. But we need to create a regulatory system which promotes the understanding that a piece of information will be an opinion piece, protecting free speech, or a factual piece, supported by evidence, supported by research. I believe that is one of the single biggest threats of our next generation, and not just when it comes to democracy, but right. I would say, to your point, is using this position to talk about the research, to talk about the impact. I mean, Paul, just look outside. I mean, for those of us who live in the Northern Virginia area, for those of us in Alexandria, the rise in floods, our urban planning is not prepared to handle the impact of climate change here locally in our community. It's a lived experience for so many of us. So pointing to those lived experiences, but offering solutions, right? Yes, we could upgrade if we do nothing about climate change, but we just focus on treating the problem, sure, but it's just going to aggravate, it's just going to keep getting worse. So let's focus on the front end and making sure that we're creating solutions to preventatively stop what's happening, moving towards renewable energies, moving towards a carbon-free world that we live in. We're creating structures within our day-to-day ecosystem that contributes to combating climate change.
So West End Business Association, that's our group, for which I'm vice president, and we're trying to advance the interests of the West End of Alexandria, give it some attention, but we support small businesses in general. And of course, your opportunity to be a member of Congress could do a lot to help small businesses. How much of a focus do you have on, how much thought have you given to helping small businesses in your district and beyond? And in particular, in our district, we have a lot of interaction with the federal government. And many small businesses find it difficult to interact and get contracts with the federal government to do business. And have you found that in your travels? And what kind of thinking have you about how to address that?
I have been small business owner for more than a decade here in Northern Virginia. A lot of community. I mean, you're right. We have a thriving small business community in Northern Virginia that has really been exacerbated by the rise in monopolization in the U.S. and by the impact of the pandemic. I believe that we need to create more competition in the market. Let the small guys, let the little guys compete. That's what makes the small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. It's the backbone of Northern Virginia. We've always supported them. I believe there's things to work on. We have to help our small businesses compete in the digital era. That means supporting them with resources to modernize their systems and to go online and to reach more clients that way. That means creating more competition in the market so that you don't have these conglomerates that are eating up and pushing all these small businesses out. When it comes to the restaurant industry, there are more than 100,000 applications that remain unfunded for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Yes, we're post-pandemic, but restaurant businesses that are still suffering. That's something that we need to address. Investing in the workforce, making sure that the workforce is trained and has the ability to compete for these jobs that are getting within a small business opportunities. There's a lot of work to be done, and supporting our small business community has been a pillar of this campaign. It's something, personally that I feel really passionate about, because I want to make sure that that the economy is working for all.
Would you support a special office set up in government acquisitions directed at small businesses to go beyond the SBA?
Yes, I would. I would support that. I think it's I've talked to a number of small business owners that do work with the federal government, and a lot of the issues that they're facing. What you suggested, Paul, is an excellent solution for us to help close that gap.
We are watching today on TV, for those who tuned in a little bit earlier, there is a House hearing on the subject of, well, they call it UAPs, but we're more familiarly calling it UFOs. There are a lot of videos that are hard to explain. What do you think of UFOs? Are there things we can't explain that you have watched on TV? Do you think that there is intelligent life in the universe that would bother visiting us? What's going on? What do you think?
Wow, I gotta say, this is a little bit of a fresh breath of air as a question in this political world. I do believe that there are forces, there are things that we have yet to learn about, that we are in the process of discovering. I've followed when we found, evidence of water. Water is, one of the elements that is indicative of life existing. So, yes, are there things we have not learned about? Are there elements in the universe that are yet to be discovered by humankind on planet Earth? Yes, we believe so. As to the form and what that looks like, that is something that I have yet to explore. But I do think that there is something. What it looks like and how it operates it remains a mystery. But am definitely supporting efforts for us to continue research and learning more about what other forms may exist out there.
Well, we've seen some remarkable pictures come back from space from our investments in technology. We've just seen a picture of a black hole at the center of our galaxy. That was a stunning picture that it took, I believe, 5 or so years to develop and present to us. We need to, and would you agree that we need to invest more money in the hard sciences so that we can remain on the cutting edge when it comes to space and in science in general?
Absolutely. I believe in supporting STEM education. I believe that a STEM education for our children is the future for having them compete for the jobs of today and the future. Investing in research for understanding what exists beyond our planet and supporting those efforts is essential. But I do believe, we are seeing more interaction between our planet and other planets in this galaxy. So I think that's only going to continue. And look, there may be opportunities that benefit us. That is opening for so much research and understanding that could perhaps, a lot of even thinking about materials, as we start building. So I see tremendous potential in supporting efforts to invest there for our children and also for our research community in the space is very important.
We're running close on time here, so let me just address the arts, since we haven't really talked about that. Do you believe government has a role in helping to fund the arts in America, especially in areas that are deprived of sufficient funds for that?
Yes, I do. And as you can see from behind me, I have the Conventional Arts Caucus poster in our campaign office as someone who has been very active personally in our arts community. The benefits and its contribution to American society is whole idea of the federal government in that. And I'll tell you, I do think it's a local of ways in which our community operated has transitioned through pandemic. I believe will continue to transition. I've spoken to members within the music community and many communities within the arts, and we're constantly thinking of new ways to reach our audience, new ways to expand the reach, and federal government can help support that. And I think should help support. What I would also love to see is a focus on diversity and inclusion in the arts. Historically, it's been overrepresented by one community. I think it's important for us to extend that reach to communities of color, to working class Americans, because it can really enrich lives so many. And so let's always keep in mind towards diversity and equity and put our money behind these policies so that it's reaching all communities.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, we have run out of time. I want to thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us for WEBA's Conversations. It's been enlightening. I hope you found it interesting. I hope our audience has found it interesting. And I hope they'll return in a week so we will once again have another one of these conversations, this time with incumbent Congressman Don Beyer. And until then, stay safe. And thanks for showing up and being our audience.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for those who tuned in. If you're interested in learning more about me and my campaign and the policies that we're promoting, please visit victoriaforcongress.com. Get in touch. You can email us at info@victoriaforcongress.com. Share your concerns, your aspirations, and what we can do to help. And thank you so much for hosting me. I'm very happy to have had this conversation with you today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm Paul Friedman, and we're out. Have a great day.